Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Amani Burris is a Democratic candidate in the 26th Senate District. She's from Madison, and the primary is August 11th. Amani, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you, Steve, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're a new candidate in the political process. So, what do you consider your top issue, Amani?
Yeah, so my top issue is economics, and that's really because of experience that I went through that I wasn't able to solve. I had owned $4.2 million in real estate in 2008 through the Great Depression, recession, what was like a depression to me. I lost it all. And that's when I got real about where we are in the political world, in our political lives, even if we don't want to be involved in that. Because when you go from one spectrum, right, I would consider myself to be, surely middle class, upper middle class, and go down through the bottom, you get to see what really matters and where people are really at.
Wow. I was looking at your bio. I found it intriguing because you say you were born into a protest. Activism I was born into. We've seen a lot of activism recently with protests and the demand for police reform. So talk to me about changes that you would be wanting to see made in police practices.
Yeah, so I think it's there's a variety of changes, and because I have been in the law and advocated for for foreclosure defense and for consumer protection and housing discrimination and eviction, I don't take policy lightly, and I know that there are experts that have studied it. For example, Obama's My Brother's Keeper and other organizations that have fed into that have some excellent proposals that we can do. As I understand it, that 70% of our issues could be reduced by following these 8 talking points that people have really researched and really studied. So I was born into a protest because my mom came to Madison from Boston and had worked for the NAACP there and had worked on desegregation of school and school busing. My sister was like Kamala Harris, where she was. My parents were divided about what should happen to their precious daughter. And so when she arrived, she was at a protest and I was an infant. I had asthma and she had tear gas thrown in her face and someone grabbed me and saved me. And so it's over time that I realized, like, I was named on purpose. My name has a purpose, and the way that I was raised is on purpose. And I have parents that are on the opposite spectrum of things. My mom is now passed, but she was a civil rights activist, and my dad's philosophy was: you get up, you go to work, you do the right thing. If people ask you the wrong question, you call them in rather than calling them out.
I see. Okay. Well, let's talk about some other issues. Where do you stand on the legalization of both medical and recreational marijuana?
Yes. So, it's here, right? Most of the states have legalized marijuana, and I think it's an opportunity in the criminal justice system to cause reform there, and also to solicit entrepreneurship. And so there I would be concerned about are the people that have suffered under the marijuana laws, if you will they have a chance to become entrepreneurs, to do restoration, to live their lives? Because the way that I look at it, I don't condone, drug dealing, and I look at people that are doing it, and I think, wow, they really have entrepreneurial spirits. Like I had several small businesses, so they're dealing with customers, they're dealing with sales, they're dealing with gripes, they're dealing with distribution. And so if we can tap into that in Wisconsin and we can make it accessible to everybody, we might be able to make a difference, and it will help the tax base as well.
Let's talk about reapportionment, the process of drawing the next congressional Senate and Assembly boundary lines. The Constitution says the party in power should draw those boundaries. The governor wants a People's Commission to draw the lines and then recommend them to the lawmakers. What's your position on who should draw the next boundaries?
Yeah, so I support the governor's position, and most recently I left to run for state senate. I was working for the Wisconsin Democratic Party as an organizer down in Waukesha, which is the hotbed of this election, because it went for Obama, not quite. In certain parts it went for Obama and then changed. And so I really got to understand the depth of gerrymandering. So I think two things that happen. And gerrymandering is, of course, the cutting of maps for one party over another. And I think that is, it's not good for anybody. So we do need to come at it on a nonpartisan way so that the people can be represented, everybody can have a voice, and we don't just get into this extreme political game that we're in. And that's what happened on April 7th with the Karofsky election.
Okay. The governor has warned that the pandemic could cause a $2 billion drop in state tax collections in the fiscal year that started, yesterday. If you're a state senator, this would give you some tough options. Do you cut spending on current programs, or do you look for additional revenues like higher taxes or higher fees? What would be your approach?
I would look to, do A plus B. We're going to have to make some cuts, and then we're also going to have to look at some revenue resources. But first, before we do anything, we're going to have to look at things through the eyes of regular, everyday people like you and me. We are the ones that have worked really hard to flatten the curve. We have been safer at home. We've stayed home. We've been with our kids. We've been with our grandkids at home. We've looked at our neighbors, and so we need to look to what is going to support the people. And I found that out in 2008, that there weren't really a lot of laws in housing to protect human beings that had, spent their life, having a good credit score, paying on time, ran into a situation, and there was nothing there to protect them. The banks got $750 billion. They got the properties back. They got the tax write-off, and we the people got blamed, and that really wasn't the truth. And that's why I got in there and fought for 10 years.
Okay, two questions on the COVID pandemic. It's hit the economy and the healthcare providers the state relies on especially hard. Recessions cause less revenues for the state, but more demands for safety net programs like Medicaid. If you're a state senator voting on the next state budget, should hospitals be made a greater priority in that budget?
We have to take a look at whatever is going to be best for the people. We're lucky because our governor got out early and helped to stem what could have been disaster that we're seeing now in other states that didn't do anything or they didn't believe it. And so we have to work together to find support and go the right path. So I don't have every single answer there, but I do have the ability to assess it, to understand it, to talk to a variety of people, and to bring diversity to the table to say, did you think about this? And then make a decision. We're going to have to work with people. It's not a matter of we fight because we're in the minority and we're at risk of going into the super minority. It's going to be about raising the Democratic profile, standing our ground on being Democrats and the values that we share there, and then also finding ways to find common ground. My theme of my campaign, if you will, and it's really in my life, is united in our differences. So you get to be you, Steve. I get to be me, Amani, and we can find common ground. There are things that we can work together on.
Should businesses that follow all the prescribed COVID-19 practices, either from WEDC or the CDC, should they be immune from frivolous lawsuits?
Well, the courts are going to have to answer that, because people have a right to file a lawsuit, and we can't just do a blanket stance on things. I know they've done that. They've changed the laws where they want to restrict our access, which is voicing our rights when we're in the court system. So I appreciate they will have a defense. The businesses will have a defense if they follow the protocol. That just takes us into what I call political nitty gritty. When we take stances like that, we just get in deep into political nitty gritty, and then we can't turn it around and do what's best for the people. So I'm going to keep an eye on that diversity and what's best for the people, because of being out there and listening to people, because of my own experiences, because we've looked at some of these problems for like schools, the achievement gap. We looked at it starting back with my mom, Malele Chikasa Anana, who ran Umoja magazine here and was the first Black woman elected to a school board in Wisconsin. We had an achievement gap then. I feel now, because of COVID-19, because we've all had to stay home and look at the news and do research, that we're ready to make change. And we know that it's going to be difficult and it's going to take time, but we know that we can do this, just like we can stay home.
Thank you. A couple of questions on property taxes. Wisconsin has some of the highest property taxes in the nation, which is why what school districts and local governments can levy in property taxes, there are caps, there are limits. Now, referendums, of course, can exceed those limits. So if you're a state senator, would you vote to continue those caps, those limits on property taxes, or get rid of them?
So that's an interesting question, and that I've come to understand better. And I think, me being an average person, is people don't realize that the way that the budget is controlled in the legislature is controlling the law. In other words, by only allowing these, referendums at certain points in time, and so many, and putting laws in that, it allows them to control what happens on a local level in our school systems without even being part of the local process. So we've got to say no to that. We have to return it to the local school boards, because they are the ones that are dealing with the problem. What is good in one part of Wisconsin may not be good in another part of Wisconsin. And I can say that because I was born in Madison and raised both in Madison and in Green Bay, Wisconsin. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, of course, when I was raised, it was all union. And, we had to go through what happened with the factories closing and change happening.
And then a follow-up question. Because local governments rely 40% on property tax to provide those services, do we need to consider alternative revenue sources for local governments? Perhaps broadening the 5% sales tax to now exempt products and services, giving local governments the ability to levy a half-cent sales tax? Do we need to consider alternative revenue sources for local governments, Amani?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we've got to take a look at it. Government is business. And when your business is failing, or in the school system, for example, where 40% of your product is coming off the line and it's not working, you have to stop and say, what can we do? So we have to face the fact that we are going to have to do things differently, and we can adjust. We adjusted to COVID-19 incredibly so in just a few months. We never thought that we'd be doing this interview over Zoom. We wish we had invested into Zoom. Right. And we never thought that our homes would become our offices and our phones would become the office phone. So I think we're ready for that. And I think as a lot of people understand why, I think what the biggest problem in politics, myself included, what I mean by this is I didn't really understand the whole process until I found the room and got into the room. And I think part of it, and part of my job as state senator, is to communicate issues in a way that people understand it and they go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I want this. I can't see that I use the road, so we have to pay for it.
Well, using the example of roads, we've not been able to stabilize highway funding. Our gas tax, 30.9 cents per gallon, hasn't been increased in 10 years. Is it time to raise that gas tax?
We got to take a look at everything. Everything's on the table. Everything's on the table. I know Governor Evers looks at things. He comes from a very analytical point of view and life point of view, and it's not easy. So before we went into, and I keep going back to COVID-19 because we were in that in real life, is like before he went and started working and making these proposals for COVID-19, he was able to explain to people why we will flatten things. It will get better. It's going to be very painful. So when I'm on the kids, I go, okay, I am not only saving my family, but I'm saving all my neighbors that are right here.
Okay. There was a study that said in 2015, out-of-state contractors were awarded $72 million in contracts for public works projects authorized by local governments. That number, $72 million, more than doubled to $146 million in 2018. So the question, should bidding standards and requirements give preferences to Wisconsin companies when local governments want to authorize public works projects, Amani?
I think we want to build the economy all around. So we have to look at we got to take a look at that and see if that's the best proposal, the best thing to do. And then what are the impacts? So so we need to look at, a scientific method. We need to look at the why, what's going on, what's worked, what hasn't worked. If it's just because, my friend owns a company and my friend lives in Ohio, that's not going to work. But if it's something that makes sense, then we can support that. So, we have to survive in Wisconsin. We are the ones that are working hard. I've lived here. I love Wisconsin. We need to take care of Wisconsinites and look through the lens of that and the diversity of it within that too. Because there's if we're going to talk about out of state contractors, then we're obviously going to need to look at expanding opportunities for those that have not been able to be contractor, don't know how to start, don't know what the process is, don't know what the regulations are, and don't know how to fit the rules. And so I think that I am a person that can communicate that and reach out to different communities.
Okay, well, you kind of got into my final question, which is the differences between you and the other candidates in the August 11 primary.
Yeah.
Why are you the most qualified?
Why am I the most qualified? I don't think there's going to be major policy differences amongst any of us, right? We're all Democrats. We're all going to vote in that same matter. The difference is the ability to reach across the aisle and reach out into different communities and bring a bevy of different experiences and to find a way to be united in our differences, to work together, to come together, to have different people and different life situations and education and all the differences that we have in the world at the table. And I think I'm the best person for that. I can, be a Green Bay girl. I can work down in Waukesha. They had sent me down in Waukesha to work with people in Waukesha. I had a great time down there. We made a lot of progress. We helped Joe win. And then, I'm a Madison girl. So I think you need to also be able to go, and cross these different boundaries and bring everybody to the table. And I'm hoping to do that as your next senator. Thank you.
Amani Burris of Madison is a Democratic candidate in the 26th Senate District. The primary is August 11. Amani, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
And thank you very much. And I forgot to say, of course, if you want to learn more about me, go to Amani for Wisconsin, FOR, Wisconsin, AmaniForWisconsin.com. And thank you, Steve, again for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You're very welcome. Thank you now.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.